and welcome to the Deschutes Public Library online programming. I'm Laurel Westendorf, part of the Community Relations team, and today we're hearing a presentation and panel discussion on Demystifying Dyslexia, organized by Decoding Dyslexia of Central Oregon. Before we get started, I want to say a few words about A Novel Idea, Oregon's largest community reading program. This program on dyslexia was inspired by this year's A Novel Idea selection, When All Is Said, since the main character, Morris, has dyslexia. This year, as we move to A Novel Idea programming online, we appreciate more than ever the ongoing support of Deschutes Public Library Foundation. Thanks to their generous support, A Novel Idea has grown into the largest community-wide reading project in Oregon, bringing people across the country together to discuss and learn about each other through the lens of one book. The foundation is supported by generous donors, including Oregon Cultural Trust, Lonza, Oregon Arts Commission, the Roundhouse Foundation, RBC Wealth Management, U.S. Bank, the E.H. and M.E. Bowerman Advised Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation, the Bulletin, William Smith Properties, the Friends Organizations of the Deschutes Public Library, and over 300 individual donors. In addition to A Novel Idea, the Library Foundation financially supports the library's youth initiatives, including summer reading, early learning spaces, and baby packets. Please consider donating to the foundation and the important work they are doing to secure the future of the Deschutes Public Library. Visit their website at www.dplfoundation.org. For our program today, a panel was brought together by Sharon Belusi, the co-lead of Decoding Dyslexia of Central Oregon. It is a parent-led grassroots movement for dyslexia that aims to raise dyslexia awareness, empower families to support their children, and inform policy. Sharon, thank you so much for spearheading this.
Thanks for having us in your program, Laurel. Before I introduce the panel, I want to give you an overview of dyslexia, what it is, what it isn't, and some reasons why we should all learn more about dyslexia. Let's start with why you should care. I have some sobering statistics from the National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Literacy. Dyslexia is the leading cause of reading failure and school dropouts in our nation. Reading failure is the most commonly shared characteristic of juvenile justice offenders. 50% of adults cannot read a book written at an 8th grade level. The bad news for dyslexic children is that if help starts in 4th grade rather than in late kindergarten, it takes 4 times as long to improve the same skills by the same amount. The good news, though, is that reading failure caused by dyslexia is highly preventable when students are identified early and provided direct multisensory explicit instruction in phonological awareness. Many people have never heard the term phonological awareness. I sure hadn't, even though it's the foundation of reading. And I'll explain what it is on the next slide. So what is dyslexia? Well, the origins of the word means difficulty with language. And so this includes not just reading, but spelling, writing, and grammar as well. In people with dyslexia, the areas of the brain that become the centers of language and reading have weaknesses in the structure or wiring. This weakness affects phonological and phonemic awareness, which is the ability to recognize and manipulate the sounds of language. This includes recognizing rhyme and syllables and the ability to identify individual sounds in a word, like k, a, t in cat. And if you struggle to identify the individual sounds and words and map them to letters, the entire process of learning how to read really does seem like a magic trick. But when kids can get the right instruction and practice with these skills, they can and will learn to read. Now let's talk about some common dyslexia myths. The first is that it's rare. The truth is that dyslexia affects about 1 in 5 people. That's 20%. And this is true globally as well as in the United States. The second myth is that it's defined by flipping letters. This is not true. Dyslexia is not defined by flipping letters like B and D. It's not a problem with vision either, like seeing was for saw. As the reading brain develops, it rewires to distinguish between letters like B and D, letters that are the same shape but a different orientation. And flipping letters is developmental, and all kids go through it. The harm of this myth that dyslexia is only about flipping letters is that teachers see so many kids grow out of letter reversals so they think kids will grow out of dyslexia, and it's simply not true. The third myth is that kids with dyslexia are not smart, or they're not trying. Well, dyslexia has nothing to do with intelligence. For kids with dyslexia, it just takes a lot more intensive practice with the basics of reading before letters and sounds and reading words starts to stick. This can look like laziness, but kids with dyslexia really are trying hard to understand something that is really difficult for their brain. The fourth myth is that kids will grow out of dyslexia. The truth is that kids will never grow out of dyslexia. Kids or adults may overcome dyslexia or adapt to their weaknesses, but they will always have characteristics of dyslexia. So next, let's talk about some early warning signs of dyslexia. Kids with dyslexia won't have all of these signs, but they typically will have a cluster of them. So the signs are late to talk, mixing up words, sounds and words like heckalopter or paschetti instead of helicopter and spaghetti. They may have articulation difficulties or difficulties with word retrieval. They'll say stuff or thing instead of spoon or napkin. They also have difficulty with rhyming, trouble learning their ABCs, difficulty with left and right, difficulty tying shoes, which is a multi-step process, or telling time, which requires knowing directionality of the hands of the clock. There's also the family history of dyslexia. If a parent has dyslexia, there's a 50% chance that any one of their children could have dyslexia. Now, kids with dyslexia may be great with Legos and people and animals and oral language, and their aptitude with everything else really makes these warning signs easy to overlook. This brings me to something that hits parents really pretty hard, and that's how unexpected dyslexia is. My daughter was a funny, curious, bright, and book-loving kindergartner. We had no reason to expect that she wasn't going to do great in school and wasn't going to learn to read. And seeing her transform into a second grader who was just a crying mess when we asked her to read was terrifying as a parent and really difficult to understand. So I think the statement, dyslexia is an island of weakness and a sea of strengths, sums up dyslexia pretty well. So now that I've covered some of the basics of dyslexia at a real high level, I want to have our panel introduce themselves, and then we're going to tie all of this back to our novel when all is said. So let's bring everybody from the panel, and I'll introduce myself first. I'm Sharon Belushi, and I'm the parent of a 13-year-old with dyslexia. My daughter was informally diagnosed in mid-4th grade, and we've been working with a private tutor. She's been working with a private tutor ever since then. I volunteered my time to educate parents and teachers about dyslexia because of how difficult it was for our family to get the help that we needed and get to the point where we understood why my daughter was struggling and what was going on. So I want to speed up the process of getting kids the help they need to be successful readers. Jared?
Hi, thank you, Sharon. My name is Jared Blank. I'm with the International Dyslexia Association Oregon branch. I'm an advocate. I love to work in this community and give back because I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 5 and recently wrote a book, Running the Distance.
And Mike?
My name is Mike Marshall, and my child is a dyslexic, and myself, along with my wife, own the Bend Learning Center, where we test and support children with learning differences. And it's a passion of mine, and I'm happy I can be part of this panel.
Thanks, Mike. And Danielle?
I'm Danielle Thompson, and I work as a teacher at Forest Grove High School. I also am president of the International Dyslexia Association Oregon branch. Then I also work as a tutor and a screener for students with dyslexia. People that I care about are dyslexic, and I'm interested in sharing all I can about dyslexia and learning all I can about dyslexia to help transform how we do school for these types of learners.
Thanks, Danielle. So I'm gonna ask a few questions to get us started. With this book, as the story opens, we learn that Maurice, who's the main character, is 84 years old, and he's lived his life in rural Ireland. It would have been about 1936 when he started school, and 1946 when he dropped out at age 10. Now, some of our readers might assume that the school experience with dyslexia would be way different back then than it is today. So tell us, what would the experience be like for a child with dyslexia now, or maybe a few years back for some of us?
You know, I think the challenges of Maurice's environment are really typical of what children today face. And I go back and reflect on my own experience and how difficult it was to read in the classroom. And looking at classroom material, for me, I remember getting sheets of instructions and it just feeling like I was looking at a picture. The words wouldn't really make sense to me in my head. And I think that a lot of the students that struggle with reading today have that same experience.
Right. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, oh, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Well, I think, historically, decades ago, often kids were looked upon as having a mental handicap, and maybe the nicest term was they were termed word blind. And up until recently, I think children were often told that they were just delayed, or the parents were told that they were delayed, and that they'd catch up. But up until recently, those were kind of the things that children were hit with when you have a Jared or a child that has dyslexia, can't read, and they're like, well, what's going on? And now, fortunately, we have some legislation where children are being told that they may have signs of dyslexia, or they but it's still daunting to have one of the foundational things you have to do in school, and it's just not easy. And no matter how schools look at it, the kids with dyslexia have a hard time.
Yeah, it's interesting with my daughter. She actually is a wonderful illustrator, and her coping mechanism, she didn't get in trouble. She wasn't goofing off, but she would draw all the pictures as answers to the questions. And her teachers would ask her, well, spend a little bit more time on the writing piece, Amanda. And of course she wasn't going to, because that was the really hard part. So she would just illustrate the stories and color and all of that. And that was her coping mechanism. And we just didn't understand that that was what she needed to do to help herself feel good, and to deal with the fact that she was really struggling with reading and writing.
I think it's interesting. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just think it's interesting on that point, because talking to a number of students with dyslexia, a lot of them see the world through pictures. So their ability to express it through that makes complete sense.
Right. So another thing in the book that I wanted to talk about is that Maurice adored his older brother, Tony. And Tony was his main support and was always there for him as he struggled in school. At one point in the story, Maurice recalled, day after day, Tony walked by my side, still trying to encourage me. While my parents had long given up coaxing and pushing me out the door, Tony never stopped telling me I was full of greatness. So can someone talk about their main support person and what that meant for you when you were in school?
Yeah, Sharon, for me, it was definitely my parents, and I'm so fortunate to have that support system, because I remember just being in the classroom. So often you're kind of beating yourself up in the classroom because it's so hard and so challenging, and then to being able to go back home and it would have that support to keep encouraging me, to keep pushing me, to keep going forward. So it was this constant, like, get beat down in school, come back, get puffed up at home, and then have that same routine. But without that support system, it would have been really, really hard.
Yeah, I think as someone that deals with a lot of kids with dyslexia, I think what I see is, and as a teacher, these kids are confused with the language and the symbols and the sounds, and really without help, they become helpless, and then they become hopeless. And I think, that then leads into behaviors that, we may see anxiety, that will, the book talks about and we talk about here, or acting out, or becoming a comedian, or just a variety of things, but often anxiety. I mean, these kids, deep down, they think they may be smart, but there's so many indicators that they need the parent, they need their brother, they need a teacher or a counselor that's willing to stand up for them and make them understand they may be different, but they are capable and they just need a different route. So that confusion stage is really hard for kids when it doesn't get clarified, and they become hopeless. So.
Right. And I think for my daughter, I could just really see a change in her dynamic when we understood she had dyslexia, and we understood that she shared that with a family member, with my husband, and we could tell her, you're going to be okay. You and your dad, you're peas in a pod, your brains work the same way. It's different from the way other people's brains work, but you're going to be fine. Just hang in there, and you're going to be okay. And I think having that knowledge that she was not alone was incredibly helpful.
It's Sharon, sorry, I just wanted to touch on that. We have with the Oregon branch, we have a student panel, and their big mission is "You are not alone." And they have a whole campaign where they're reaching out to other students, because I think that camaraderie among other students or peers, or be it the connection with an adult that has dyslexia, is so important for the students that are going through it.
So another theme from the book, because of his reading difficulties, Maurice often calls himself stupid. And he recounts that every morning they had to pull me kicking and screaming from my bed. I stood crying in my nightshirt, screaming at the odds, telling them I wouldn't go back. This might sound extreme to some readers, and I'm just wondering, what is the reality for a child with dyslexia?
When I test students for dyslexia, I often have an intake interview, and I talk with the parents and the students about what their childhood schooling experience was like. And what Maurice experiences in the book still happens today. I have students running out of school at kindergarten to escape, hiding under desks, or, refusing to get out of the car to go. And recently I heard an interview by Henry Winkler, who is most proud of his achievements in writing the Hank Zipser series that's based on his experience as a child with dyslexia. And he said his favorite thing to do is to share his book in classrooms and libraries around the country and have conversations with students. But he was struck by them sharing the same feelings of shame and self-doubt and anxiety about school and learning that he had in school so long ago. And he had hoped that things were better, by now, after all this time had passed, but he was struck by the similarities with students' stories. That's something we've got to do better.
Yeah, our child refused to go to school in preschool because it was going to be his turn to describe what the ABC song was all about. And the other kids got the connection between the symbols on the wall and the song. And he knew he was going to be humiliated. And he, long story short, he wasn't going to go to school. And I think, the sad thing is as Danielle is saying, is that, teachers have the best intentions, but too often they don't, the training is not thorough throughout the schools yet. They've made a great step in getting, at least one person per school trained, but the vast majority of the people that children come in contact with don't really understand that reading is such a contrived thing, and that to expect every child to be able to just get it, or that it's as difficult it is for a child with dyslexia, is still a struggle. I know when I was in schools, it was, often the teachers would say, well, just don't make them read out loud. Or, I have a student that was told that, just sit in the back, when we're reading. And so, teachers don't know what to do. And fortunately they're beginning to, but these poor children are still going through a lot.
I've got two things to add on that. Thank you. At the high school, I see students who have struggled at reading for years and years and years. And so, you know, their coping looks like being unengaged, either, you know, not attending or not completing assignments, or especially like at freshman and sophomore levels, still acting out in the classroom to have all kinds of barriers and buffers up. And so when they come across someone who may know exactly how to help them, they still have a lot of sort of walls to break down before they can really, you know, succeed at learning. But it's never too late for anyone at any age to learn how to read. And I think that's a pretty inspiring sentiment for all of us to carry forward. And then I wanted to say one other thing, and it was related to our students. Their fight or flight mode, you know, kicks in, and that's worth paying a huge amount of attention to, especially if they're very young and they're refusing to do something. Parents, take that seriously and look further. And as teachers and students learn more about dyslexia in the way that you titled this session, Demystifying Dyslexia, that's so valuable for us all to be able to see, you know, what was hidden to be more visible. Then we all grow and are a part of a better environment because of it.
Thanks, Danielle. So another aspect of the book, and this you find out later on, is that Maurice hid his dyslexia as an adult. In fact, his wife and son never knew he was dyslexic. And during the story, Maurice is often reading a paper and doesn't seem to have any problems. Later in the book, he confesses that it's not that I can't read, I can after a fashion, at my own pace, and no one's standing over my shoulder. I always have found a way round things. I was a great one for losing the glasses at the right moment or complaining about small print. So have you, any of you, hidden your dyslexia or seen others with dyslexia that gets hidden? And why did you decide to start talking about it?
I think I hid it for a while, a long time actually. I didn't start talking till about it recently in my life. And one of the reasons was because I recognized that some of the same challenges that I faced 30 years ago in school were still occurring today. And so in order to kind of demystify dyslexia, part of this panel, talking about it seemed like the only approach. And I had a ton of strategies to avoid some of those reading situations. For example, I have a running group that I meet with, and we meet at a restaurant and then go for a run and then go back to the restaurant, and reading a menu even today is still challenging. And so I will auditorially listen to what people are ordering to figure out kind of the best option for me still. And so there is tricks to kind of get around those situations.
Yeah, I think an interesting aspect of hiding dyslexia, and as it's interesting with my daughter, I would not be sure from day to day whether or not she was actually reading. I mean, it seemed some days that she was, and then some days she would really stumble. And in retrospect, I think about when we had reading time and she'd always pull the same 4 books off the shelf. And you're always told it's great that they read the same book again and again, but they were the books she knew. She had them memorized. And so she gave that appearance of reading. And then when we'd ask her to read a book that she was unfamiliar with, she would start the crying thing. And it would be really hard to press her to read the book. You know, we always talk about wanting kids to love reading. And as a parent, when you really want your child to love reading and they're really pushing that hard against it, it's very confusing, and you don't want to push too hard. And so you get into the situation where you're not quite sure what the right thing is to do, and you're not quite sure what's going on. And these kids just adapt, and they confuse you, and they're just trying to, it's self-preservation on their part, but it makes it really hard to figure things out, even at that early age.
Yeah, I think those tricks you start to, and like looking back at my academics, like when I was younger, you start to develop those strategies for getting around, figuring things out. And I think that's why you see so many creative dyslexics or innovative, and not everyone has those, there's different skill sets among dyslexics, so I want to be careful on that, but those are a lot of the strategies that they figure out on how to work around and kind of stay in the game.
Okay, so another question. Maurice was clearly successful in business and in life. He was a little rough around the edges, but he was intelligent and he understood people. So what are some of the strengths that you have found or seen with dyslexia? And, did Maurice get lucky in life, or are individuals with dyslexia often successful?
Well, I think Jared kind of hit on it, that I think often adults and children with dyslexia are resilient. They've learned coping skills, and those can often translate into how to get around and how to survive. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, and some kids really get damaged by all the beating down of or the self-talk of not being smart or what have you. But I think, Sharon, it's a good question, because I think the kids that really do learn to work hard and get through it, they can be incredibly resilient and creative, as Jared spoke to, and successful. But as the question before spoke to, they're often hiding it. I've had adults the wife knew and helped the adult, and they're like, well, I need to learn, and so I think resilience would be one thing that I would say that they may have. But I guess the luck is not, it's not luck. Luck comes with, in my opinion, from a lot of hard work. So I think if anything, learn how to work hard and what that learning process is.
Yeah, Sharon, I like this question too, and Mike touched on a lot of it. I'm always conflicted by this one, because I agree. I think it's figuring out what the passions are, what the strengths are of the student, and then being able to work hard within the environment. Where I get challenged with it, though, is without the support and the right resources behind each of the students, to Mike's point, that outcome becomes potentially very unfavorable. And that's where you get into some of the behavior issues. That's where you get into some of the long-term things. So it's always a conflict for me, because I feel that if we do have the right supportive environment, that the majority of these students can be successful. It's just the lack of resources and the lack of support we have for them yields the results that are unfavorable.
Right. I mean, I count ourselves lucky that we're able to provide my daughter with the support she needs. And I know so many parents who can't do that, and it breaks my heart. I get choked up when I think about how lucky we are to provide that for my daughter. And I would want that every parent could provide what they need to help their children, and that every school would be able to provide that support as well.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, like I'm so fortunate and grateful for the support I had. And even with that support, I know how hard it is. So to imagine an environment where that doesn't exist, I think that's where we get into those detrimental situations. So that's a lot of the reasons why I like to do this advocacy work, is to just keep pushing the message.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely, I encourage all the, the teachers and administrators and parents and even kids, to anybody that's curious about this, to, I think Sharon will be sharing a list of resources, and, or look up into the organization that you two are involved in, and any type of light you can bring to this issue, I think is a great thing. Allowing children to struggle and not have clarity for what is going on is really a sad thing to allow it to happen.
We recently had a webinar with some of our student panelists, and when asked if they were okay with knowing that they were dyslexic, with that label, I believe all of them said yes, like that was something that allowed them to understand themselves and the way that they learn. And it helped to, put a name to their struggle, rather than for them to proceed thinking that there was something inherently wrong with them. So takeaways for all of us, I think, would be one, for students and adults with dyslexia, you are exactly as you should be. You are okay as you are. And for parents and teachers and caregivers who work with students and adults with dyslexia, this is a most common learning difference. The more we talk about it and demystify it, then it becomes visible. It does not need to be hidden. And we all benefit from that. And the last thing I just wanted to sort of hit home, I'm glad at the end of his life, Maurice, was sort of able to reflect on those people that had the most meaningful relationships with him. But just for adults and students to know, you are not alone.
Thanks. And I think I would add that if you think that your child has any characteristics of dyslexia, the most important thing is to not wait. I always feel like we waited too long, took too long for us to find resources. There are resources locally. We are here to support parents, and at the end there will be a list of resources, podcasts, books, if you're interested in learning more about dyslexia. Well, thanks everyone. Is there anything else you want to add before we go?
Sharon, I just wanted to say thank you so much for hosting this and putting together this panel. It's really awesome work that you're doing and spreading this and demystifying dyslexia. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I guess if one thing is just, when I talk to parents and kids, I do try to say that to put in perspective that reading is a very new creation, and the expectation that we should all be able to just magically read is really not a rational idea. It's a miracle that so many people can read easily, but it's definitely not beyond expectations. There's something that this idea that we turn the language into symbols and then we should understand with those symbols what the sounds are and that it should be easy to do. It's not, the kids that struggle, it's nothing wrong with you. It's an expectation, this created expectation we have that you struggle with, and you can get beyond it, but there's nothing wrong. It's just a tough battle you're going to have to go through with this new expectation we have. So, but thank you, Sharon.
Thank you so much, each of you, for sharing your experiences and helping our community to be more aware and supportive of dyslexic people. And I think that's the big takeaway here, is to be supportive. And I'm going to share some resources right now that I will leave up. And yeah, thank you, all of you.